Good morning and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody watching this. It's the 17th of March, 2024. And very early in the morning here. Hence, I've got my coffee with me, which I will be sipping on throughout the day. We had a long day yesterday in my household, and today it's going to be another long one. So let's get to our super happy fun time story. If I talk to you about the gift of love, what does that sound like? That sounds like the mutual giving of total self between spouses that we get in the sacrament of holy matrimony. Well, we are now giving that kind of language from Papa Francis himself in a new autobiography called It's called Life, My Story and History. I have pre-ordered this. It will be out it'll be out on Tuesday, the feast of St. Joseph, because of course it will be. Why not at this point? And actually, there's a lot here. I'm not going to go over the whole Gloria TV thing. In fact, I'm not going to go over the Gloria TV thing at all, really. It's just the most useful picture of Francis's autobiography or biography. I strongly suspect that this was ghost written by Austin Iveray, the professional Francis fan fiction writer who wrote, I think, the most unintentionally eye-opening tell-all about Francis early in the Francis pontificate, and that was The Great Reformer, a book that I've mentioned numerous times, where if you want to read a lot of things that will really alert you to what Francis was really about, going back to his days in seminary, you read the first edition of that book. And I say the first edition because his time working with the Argentinian government in the battle days, the 60s and 70s, a lot of that was omitted in future editions because he told too much. Okay. So if you can find a first edition, I invite you to do so. I have one. I'm not sure where my copy is right now. My home office is a bit of a mess at the moment, but I have my copy of Francis's new biography pre-ordered. It'll be here probably Tuesday. I'm going to do a quick perusal of it, looking for certain things about Argentina and other things, but I will be comparing it to The Great Reformer in my review of it because I'm just very curious. But in that, he talks about how the James Martin crowd live the gift of love, whatever that means. He told us a lot of excerpts from this weird book were published by an Italian news website that is very, very, very pro Francis and very, very pro American project, we'll call it. They're the website is Korea.it, and it's behind a paywall. And this is important enough that I thought I would, at least for a couple of these things here from these excerpts, just use an archive version of it, because this is an important story, and we really should talk about this. So this is an excerpt from his book, and I'm going to have to be careful how we talk about things on this platform as always. So from his own book, coming out in a couple days, quote, "I imagine a mother church which embraces and welcomes everyone, even those who feel wrong and those who have been judged by us in the past." That's an interesting choice of words. I think of the James Martin types, or the confused types who seek the Lord and who have instead been rejected or chased away. The Pope confirms the blessings to irregular couples. I just want to say that God loves everyone, especially sinners. And if brother bishops decide not to follow this path, it does not mean that this is the antechamber of a schism, because the doctrine of the church is not called into question. James Martin parody of matrimony is not possible, but the civil parody of it are. That is a violation of everything the church has taught on this. We'll get to that in a moment. It is right that these people who live the gift of love can have legal coverage like everyone else. Jesus often went out to meet people who live on the margins, and this is what the church should do today with people from the James Martin crowd, who are often marginalized within the church. Make them feel at home, especially those who have received baptism, and they are, to all intents and purposes, part of the people of God. And whoever has not received baptism and wishes to receive it, or who wishes to be a godfather or godmother, please be welcome. Now, there's a lot more. Well, there's a whole lot of quotes people are talking about. He talks about sedevacantism, okay, and a bunch of other stuff. I'll talk about that in the future. I'm going to keep this one brief today just because it's a Sunday. So, and laser focused on the topic here. And just check my notes briefly. Yeah, we're going. Diane Montagna, the journalist who during the recent episode of the Synod was asking pointed questions of people at the Synod officials, very often not getting anything remotely close to an answer, but just verbal gymnastics. She posted this on Twitter. She says, "This statement that I just read to you from Francis himself contradicts a 2003 document issued by the CDF prefect Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Benedict XVI, which concludes, quote, the church teaches that respect for such persons cannot lead in any way to approval of such behavior or to legal recognition of such pairings." It is a direct contradiction, and she had on the screen there a link to a Vatican article, and I'm going to give you a bit more of it than that because it's 2024, big event happening in November in my country. You may have heard about it. Got a Catholic public figure who is probably the least Catholic, probably the most like hostile to the faith of any president since Lincoln's time. I mean, this is truly remarkable, the time we live in. Here's from the CDF document by Joseph Ratzinger. Positions of Catholic politicians with regard to legislation in favor of James Martin's stuff. If it is true that all Catholics are obliged to oppose the legal recognition of such pairings, Catholic politicians are obliged to do so in a particular way, in keeping with their responsibility as politicians. Faced with legal proposals in favor of James Martin pairings, Catholic politicians are to take account of the following ethical indications. When legislature in favor of the recognition of such pairings is proposed for the first time in a legislative assembly, the Catholic lawmaker has a moral duty to express his opposition clearly and publicly and to vote against it. To vote in favor of a law so harmful to the common good is gravely immoral. When legislation in favor of the recognition of such is already in force, the Catholic politician must oppose it in the ways that are possible for him and make his opposition known. It is his duty to witness to the truth. If it is not possible to repeal such a law completely, the Catholic politician, recalling the indications contained in the encyclical letter Evangelium Vitae, quote, could licitly support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done by such a law and at lessening its negative consequences at the level of general opinion and public morality, on condition that his absolute personal opposition to such law was clear and well known, and that the danger of scandal was avoided. This does not mean that a more restrictive law in this area could be considered just or even applicable. Rather, it is a question of the legitimate and dutiful attempt to obtain at least a partial repeal of an unjust law when its total abrogation is not possible at the moment. And that's for people working in the secular realm. This applies to Francis, who is allegedly the Pope. All right? He's not opposing these things. He's celebrating this stuff. He does it. Guess what's going to happen to Catholic politicians, especially ones who they know what the truth is. They believe the truth, but they lack the fortitude to stand up and defend the truth because of their pressures from their own party, whatever, wherever you go in the world, Switzerland, Denmark, wherever. Okay, not just the US. They see Francis doing this. That's going to give them a blank check to surrender on the issue. Even though 20 years ago, the future Pope Benedict XVI told people that they should oppose it in every way they possibly can, and if it's impossible to completely oppose and repeal such measures, to at least pass legislation that mitigates the evil being done. Okay? Let's continue now to where Diane Montagna quoted. The church teaches that respect for such persons cannot lead in any way to approval of such behavior or to legal recognition of such pairings. The common good requires that laws recognize, promote marriage as the basis of family, primary unit of society. Legal recognition of such pairings or placing them on the same level as matrimony would mean not only the approval of this kind of wicked behavior, with the consequence of making a model in present-day society, but would also obscure basic values which belong to the common inheritance of humanity. The church cannot fail to defend these values for the good of men and women and for the good of society itself. And then John Paul II approved this document and was signed by Ratzinger and his assistant at the time. So Francis is directly contradicting his predecessors on this. He is. It should be unthinkable, but I mean, this is... He did rename the John Paul II Pontifical Academy for Life. Well, he didn't rename it. He just repurposed it to work in literally the opposite of its intended purpose. So it has now people who are servants of Moloch on the actual committee. So that's where we are. Polycarp says, never allow yourself to be misled by any recent teaching by any Catholics who wants to impose new laws and rules outside the traditional teachings of our mother, the church. Exactly right. I always go back to the Commentary by St. Vincent of Lerins, a saint whose writings I was made aware of because of Francis quoting him and misusing him, who basically told us that we have to oppose novelty in the church, no matter who's promoting the novelty, and we have to just cling to what came before. That was the sum total of basically his entire message. Granted, there's a lot more to it than that. I have the entire thing. It was written in the 4th century. Copyright's open. I've got the whole thing on my channel in small pieces. I highly recommend people check those out. They are very, very good. But this is happening at at the same time that we are seeing. Oh, where did that one go? Okay, here it is. We have Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church is promoting this idea that the sin of that city whose name has become synonymous with that sin, it wasn't removed from earth by God because of the James Martin sin, but because they weren't being hospitable enough to outsiders. It's one of the lies we've heard a lot of times. Now he's publicly promoting it. And you know why he's publicly promoting it? Because he can get away with it. Because the bishops won't do anything about it. Because, frankly, many of them are probably quietly members of the James Martin crowd themselves. And many of them, well, they see what Francis is doing. And so they say James Martin has a free pass to say this nonsense. They say that despite Martin and the priest who's now the latest person to push this nonsense, a Father Richard Clifford, the Bible clearly presents the sin as the sin of that city that cries out to heaven for justice or vengeance, a sin constantly condemned in the strongest terms by the Catholic Church. For some reason, they don't accept that the faith has always said the same thing about the sin in question, that it is a particularly egregious one. St. Paul reiterates it. Yeah, Jesus himself never said much about it according to the written accounts of the things he said, but the other apostles certainly did. Does that mean he's a member of the crowd? James Martin, well, people have often suggested that he is. I don't know for sure. Yeah, Maria, he does definitely need more than fraternal correction at this point, as does Francis. I think we're at the point where fraternal correction is very 2018. We're way past that point. Well, let's actually go take a look at the substance of this. Notoriously dissident pro-James Martin crowd, Father James Martin, has praised a Jesuit academic's recently published claim that the destruction of those cities in the Old Testament, as recounted in the book of Genesis, is not about the sin whose name now is based off of the name of one of said cities. Again, this is an instant no-no on this platform. I know from experience. In an apparent effort to undercut the biblical basis for the church's constant and universal condemnation of that sin as a sin against the order of God that cries out to heaven for vengeance, the heretical Jesuit priest, Father Martin, has propped a fellow, I would say heretical Jesuit Father Richard Clifford as a biblical quote-unquote expert who claims that the sin in question was one of inhospitality towards newcomers rather than the sin that we all know it really is. In a social media post, Martin touted Clifford's interpretation of Genesis's account of the destruction of that city, writing, Richard J. Clifford, S.J., one of the world's leading Old Testament scholars, I wonder where people come up with this, by the way. Who determines that? Anyway, has written an important new essay for Outreach Catholic answering one of the most commonly asked questions about the Bible. It's the story of those cities about the James Martin sin, and his answer is no, because of course it's not. Clifford wrote an article published March 14th for Martin's pro-badness group Outreach. What we read about in that book on the two angelic servants is certainly not a warning against the James Martin sin, and all attempts to interpret the narrative in that direction seriously misread the story. The Jesuit priest continues, in Lot's eyes, the men of that city were not intent on that, which I won't say specifically, but rather on humiliating Lot, because they despised as a newcomer and his two guests. Recent accounts of warfare make clear that. Then he goes into how his logic is that because in and this isn't a new thing at all. This goes back to a lot. I mean, Genghis Khan, right? This is not new, but that, in times of these kind of conflicts, you get people using even the sins of the flesh as a means of defeating their enemy. And because of that, that's really that's what we're talking about here. He says Lot's words seem to indicate he's referring to that practice. Like, oh, really? Okay. This is, of course, they remind us that this goes against everything in the biblical tradition, including stuff that our elder brothers and any Christian of any stripe until like last week, basically, understood that the sin in question was the sin of those cities, which God himself called an abomination. You get the letter of the Apostle St. Jude, who reiterates this. James Martin has said that St. Paul, who writes about this elsewhere, and they give you some quotes here, and St. Peter, he has said that the Bible got it wrong. He is denying the inerrancy of sacred scripture on something that is not something you should ever do. Sonny Jim says, a biblical expert, he must be so enlightened to be able to overturn thousands of years of interpretation. I'd like to find a picture of that priest and just get somebody to do remember that picture I showed you yesterday of somebody had basically canonized the Archbishop of San Antonio? A picture like that of the priest, except put a little, a little dove on his shoulder to make it look like he's actually enlightened by the Holy Spirit, listening to him personally. Let's see. But that's where we are, folks. David Wilson says it comes from a book of the new religion, we'll call it. Yeah, yeah, it's weird how that works, isn't it? Yeah, so God destroyed a city because people weren't nice. Basically, they didn't have modern values about things. Small Rail says, yeah, they should stop pretending to be Catholic. I mean, I'm always surprised that they don't just go found their own church, except for the one thing, is that being Catholic comes with a lot of cachet in terms of access and resources and things that you can't get if you're a priest of something new that you just invent yourself. But yeah, Charlie Church, that is exactly. Colleen got it right. And that's what they're teaching. That they weren't nice. That's why those cities were erased from the map. Not just those two, something like 5. Those are the 2 that they name in the book, but something like 5. Colleen says, on that argument, then why are we still here surrounded by mean people? Well, remember, mercy, 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 right? And to a degree, it's true, right? The idea that Jesus is, in his infinite mercy, has had a lot of patience with us, despite how grotesquely sinful we have gotten. But at some point, his patience is going to wear thin. Something we should all be aware of in our own lives, as we wrestle with whatever sins keep sending us personally back to the confessional regularly, because everybody's got their 1 or 2 things that they deal with. His habitual sins may not be certain sins of the flesh, but everybody's got their sins that send them back over and over again to confession. And it's God's great mercy that he has great patience with us. But at some point the patience runs out, especially on the grand scale of things. The wrong kind of nice can mean spinelessness, right? And I mean, the word nice, it's, when you look at the origins of the word, it actually doesn't have good connotations at all. It didn't historically mean pleasant. It generally meant without spine, without courage, and being a pushover, and honestly, even without mental fortitude either, because you couldn't determine when it was time to stop being pleasant to people. But yes, this book is, I have it pre-ordered. I will go over it in more detail here in the coming days. I will give you a bit of a preview of probably my favorite thing that he said here, though. And it comes from Novus Ordo Watch. Yes, the Sedevacantists news outlet, but they do really good work. There, it says, Francis says Sedevacantists are mushrooms that have emerged. Feels sorry for them. When did they emerge? I mean, Sedevacantism comes from basically, for the most part, a group of priests who were expelled from the SSPX, and it's a hotly debated about the specifics about the expulsion from the SSPX, but Archbishop Lefebvre would not buy in, would not accept the sedevacantist proposition, and he wouldn't budge on a couple issues. And from there, it depends who you ask on where it came from, because there's a lot of things involving property and other things, but there were a handful of sedevacantist priests who founded their own organizations, mostly in the US, but elsewhere too. And that happened like 77, 1980, somewhere around there. To say that the sedevacantists are mushrooms that have emerged is a bit of a weird take. It's a weird take because they've been around for 44 years at least at this point. Okay. He says he feels sorry for them. Oh, that's great. And, you know, he told us, he said this Religion Digital, that this is one of those things that he talks about. He says, there are good people who don't agree with each other, says Francis. A different thing are all these mushrooms that sprung up now, these sedevacantists who look for any little thing to interpret in their own way. They're not bad people. They're sad people with a sadness of heart. I feel sorry for them. And I do wonder if he's using this description of sedevacantist as a catch-all for all the people who criticize him. I mean, I've been accused of being a sedevacantist before. I'm not, but I've been accused of it. I don't think there's anything really wrong with being with the sedevacantists, except I think that they made an error in their judgment of the crisis in the church, and that's it. I think they're fully Catholic, but, you know, it's become a pejorative, certainly has, that term, to the point where anybody who even hints that they think that maybe Francis isn't the Pope gets labeled with it as such and dismissed completely. And I think that's a really dangerous thing to do, too, because you may find yourself falling a Pied Piper with that kind of an idea. But Francis is clearly using it in that way of just dismissing all of his critiques, all of his criticisms, all of them. Regina says, don't forget to dialogue. Yeah. But yeah, just wanted to give you a brief update here on this happy Sunday morning where we have Francis the Great and Merciful publishing an autobiography. I've been told I've been sighing a lot. I'm sorry. But I am, because this is so ridiculous, where he's basically saying things like, we are all, or that basically he's admitting that he believes the church has been wrong on this issue, and that, you know, the James Martin crowd live the gift of love. Except anybody who knows anything about that knows there's no love there. There isn't. And that's what the faith, the central to the gospel, is love. And what is real love? Submission of self to the law of God, and willing to sacrifice yourself if need be for the love of others. That's really what it is. But yeah, I have it pre-ordered. I will go over the book and do it in a live stream or for the patrons or something. I haven't decided which yet, but I'll have it on the Feast of St. Joseph when it's released. If there are any questions here, please get them into the chat, because I know that some people are asking a question of you know, why is all this suddenly happening at lightning speed? And I can tell you why it is. I've never hidden that I'm not the biggest fan of any of the pre-conciliar pontiff or the post-conciliar pontiffs, really, but it is pretty obvious that in some way Benedict XVI was some kind of a barrier for them, and that this stuff began to speed up when they knew inside that he didn't have much time left before it was made public, because it started in November, December 2022, when they started ramping this stuff up. And then in 2023 was just lightning pace change that they were trying to push, made possible by their synod on synodality. And so Benedict was some kind of a barrier, and he's gone now, and they feel completely unrestrained. And you're going to get details on that in this book, because he has some choice words to say about the loyalist, or Ratzinger. All right, folks. Let's see. Church of Francis rejects 3 of the 7 sacraments: matrimony, holy orders, and Holy Communion. The one that they don't outright reject is penance, so their religion only has 3 or 4 sacraments. I mean, they don't just reject those, they just reject the traditional understanding of them. They have tweaked with them verbally, not formally, otherwise we could unequivocally accuse them of heresy. But they've just misused those sacraments. They believe in the sacraments, they just don't believe they should be limited. A random cursive review of a few encyclicals from the last 100 years or so, as historically uninformed as I am, still easy to see divergence in these documents in recent history from mid-20th century. People have asked me, How did you wake up to this stuff? Well, I wrote my doctoral dissertation in my PhD program in public policy, and I did it on Laudato Si. It's why I hammer that and focus so much on the Pachamama stuff, because I knew exactly where all that came from. And when I first read it, I was like, oh, this is pretty good, except it was kind of weird seeing a pope writing in the voice of the same kind of material that my PhD program had that we had to read. But for my dissertation, I didn't just write about Laudato Si. I actually wrote on what the Catholic Church had to say on that issue, going back to the birth of Catholic social teaching in the modern world, which began technically with Leo XIII, but there were writings from the popes, 3 or 4 of them before him, that belonged to the body too. And I ran into a problem when I, thought, well, I read Laudato Si at first, liked it, and then I read Leo XIII and Gregory the 16th and Pius X and others, and then I reread Laudato Si and realized there was a massive problem with it. And then I started reading the writings of other post-conciliar popes, and when you start putting them all as a body, yeah, there is a big problem, and it's right in the middle of the 1960s when everything changed. And that's how I saw it. So, all right, folks, thanks very much for tuning in. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.